thrilled to bring up our next speaker, Dr. Yasmin Hurd, class of '82. Of a few things that she's qualified as, she is the Ward Coleman Chair of Translational Neuroscience and Professor of Psychiatry and Neuroscience, Icahn School of Medicine. And if that wasn't enough, she's also the Director of Mount Sinai Behavioral Health System Addiction Institute, among the thousand of things she does on top of that. Yasmin is an internationally renowned neuroscientist whose translational research examines the neurobiology of drug abuse and the related psychiatric disorders. And the title of her presentation for this evening is Marijuana, From Weed to Medicine, A Scientific Journey. Big round of applause, please.
I'll also stay close to the mic. It's also weird, the journey that we've all been on. I still can't believe, Eric, that it's been X amount of years since we have, we were in the same floor together in Delaware, and Amy and Mindy, it's crazy seeing all, well, they're close friends even after all that time. I think that it's really, I like these tier ideas, and I think that it's important to get insights from many different fields. And I'm gonna obviously talk about the biology of it, because you're gonna hear all of the other speakers give you the business, and you just heard about the history. And as Neil just told you, there's a huge socio-political pendulum in our country that we started off with, went through the whole history of weed and where we are today, that there's been a decriminalization in many states, and the medical marijuana and high CBD states are popping up more and more. And the question really is it really medicinal? Because a lot of the legalization of marijuana, or quote unquote medical marijuana, was really based on trying to get recreational use of marijuana. And it's important to be able to dissociate what is medicinal. And so at the end of this, I hope that's part of our discussion. So the reason why there was a huge problem is that the marijuana plant is very complex. We have over 450 chemicals, over 100 of which are cannabinoids. Many people know of THC because that's what produces a high. That's why people were smoking it in college, and this still today. But there are many others, and so from a biological perspective, we as scientists and clinicians, we want to know which components of these plants are having the beneficial effects, and those components that actually produce the side effects that when we're trying to develop for medicine, we want to eliminate those. So your natural cannabinoids, marijuana binds to your natural cannabinoid receptors. We have natural heroin receptors. Every drug that people use, it's impinging on our natural receptors in our brain and body. We have two main types of cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2. CB1 is the one that's predominantly in our brain, and CB2 is mainly in the periphery. The periphery does a lot with immune function, and we'll talk about it for people who want to know. But in the brain, which is what I'm most interested in, our natural cannabinoid system is really critical for synaptic plasticity, how cells talk to each other. And it even is important for the developing brain. This is a picture showing the cells in your brain that expresses these cannabinoid receptors. Basically, it's actually the most abundant receptor in our brain, the most abundant. So this is one of the challenges also that we have in terms of specificity. So when you're smoking marijuana, it's hitting all of your cortex in terms of cognition, your hippocampus in terms of memory, your cerebellum down here in terms of motor coordination. So one of the things that, So one of the things that a lot of the states that started legalizing marijuana, they started to notice that certain things were happening, such as, for example, in the opioid epidemic, which is a huge factor for me. We have over 7,000 heroin abusers in our patient population at Mount Sinai, and as everyone knows, we're in an epidemic today where nearly 90 people are dying every day. They saw that in the states that legalized marijuana, that opioid use was decreasing. And there are many reasons for that. We're still trying to figure it out. But the question is, was marijuana being beneficial? And because of the fact that we are in an epidemic with more adults being prescribed opioids than even the adult population in the US, and the healthcare costs have been off the charts, we have to start thinking differently about, can we come up with some novel strategies, and indeed, could marijuana be one of those for us to really look into? So, as I said, the marijuana plant is very complex. So is it really the marijuana plant that's really being beneficial for, if it's actually even being beneficial for opioid addiction, or the other disorders that we see that there's something, it's not good for everything. So we've been looking at THC and also cannabidiol. The first thing is that for having anything to be developed to be used in humans, we have to do preclinical studies. So when you look at rats and you let them self-administer heroin, just like humans, they love it. If you give them THC, so this was us giving THC to rats, adolescents, when you were in college, and with their friends, and so then they became adults, and they definitely self-administer more heroin with THC. So THC, we know, definitely does sensitize the brain. We can go through any type of research. There are some different aspects of doses and so on, but the higher the frequency, the higher concentration of THC, it does sensitize the brain. They like heroin more. We see that even in our human kids, our young adults. We also know that THC induces the psychosis that we do see in people, and especially subgroups of people. However, cannabidiol was decreasing the psychosis. So we asked, could cannabidiol also decrease heroin addiction? We gave it to animals, and actually the first day, my junior associate, she said, oh, there was no difference. I said, great, so we know that THC is fine, and cannabidiol does nothing in terms of even exacerbating, because we were like, as I showed you, THC exacerbates heroin self-administration. However, the next couple of days she said there's something weird in the animals because they stopped self-administering, trying to seek heroin. So you give them, every time they get heroin, there's a cue line in their environment, and they know when they see that cue line that to expect heroin. Just like our addicts, it's the environmental and the craving cues, the environmental stresses that triggers again the relapse. Just like the humans, the rats, they will start seeking out the heroin, and if they got CBD before, cannabidiol, it actually reduced their heroin-seeking behavior. Interestingly, the most fascinating thing about cannabidiol is that it lasts a long time, even when it's not in the body, in reducing heroin-seeking behavior in these animals. And that has been something that's very fascinating. I see that there's unfortunately some MAC-PC conflicts. So what does this mean for the brain? So why is cannabidiol having this effect? When you're a drug abuser, there are many neurotransmitter systems that have gone awry. We know about dopamine, it's important for reward. We know that reward and dopamine are not the key components of addiction. They may start it, so when everybody in the college taking, during the weekends, dopamine plays a role that. As you become dependent, it's aspects of glutamate, which is your primary transmitter system, excitatory transmitter system in the brain, and really leads to the importance of your prefrontal cortex in terms of cognitive function. We know that when, for example, animals take heroin, just like in our human brains, we study a lot of people, unfortunately, heroin is a high mortality, so I have unfortunately a big brain bank collection, that their glutamatergic system in their brain is impaired. What cannabidiol does is normalize that. We see that it also, in heroin abusers, your natural endocannabinoid system is also impaired in heroin abusers. And again, cannabidiol normalizes that. So this is preclinical animal work. Does it make any relevance for humans? So at Mount Sinai, tried to develop clinical studies to really test this. You can't call something medicinal until you have actual proof that it is. So many people have anecdotal data that is not medicine. We will never use that to treat the thousands of people that have different disorders. So we've gone through and we're able to get a company to give us the compound of human quality. And we focus on craving. As I said, just like our rats, our human patients, the issue is the cravings that then triggers the relapse. So if we can find a medication that's not focusing on the reward, we don't really care if the drug is producing a reward, because that, I said, is not the aspect of addiction. We care if it's inducing cognitive effects and aspects of craving. So we, again, it doesn't matter. So we've been given cannabidiol in like a pilot study, and in people, we first actually just made sure it was safe. We did that first phase 1. This is a phase 2, small phase 2. Bring heroin-dependent people into the lab, show them videos they crave. We make sure nobody leaves there craving, and then we've studied different doses. And one thing we see is that when you show a heroin abuser the cue, just like our rats, they crave more. When you give them CBD, it reduces their craving. We see that actually it's probably working because cannabidiol is decreasing their anxiety. And one of the things I try to say about our rats, and I don't know if I emphasize it enough in terms of the preclinical study, is that cannabidiol's effects were present even when the cannabidiol was no longer in the body. So like weeks later, we would study the animals, show them the cue, it was still effective. The same thing like our rats, the humans, we brought them back to the lab a week or more later, no cannabidiol in their body, there's still reduced craving. We have an idea of why cannabidiol is working like that now. Hopefully we'll be able to get some work and publishing with that. But clearly cannabidiol is the component of the marijuana plant, at least from a psychiatric aspect, both for psychosis and for at least opiate addiction, that we think has the beneficial effects. We see it has very low abuse liability. In fact, no one gets reward from taking cannabidiol. We've given it in many different ways, very high doses. We also know that it has no major side effects. We also know that it reduces the opioid withdrawal symptoms. Obviously, people going through withdrawals is a huge problem. We also, as I said, the major thing that for me that's important from a clinical perspective is that it's even having a beneficial effect when it's not in the body. Other drugs have been tested now with cannabidiol. For example, alcohol, an alcohol intake, 6 weeks later, it's still effective at reducing alcohol use disorder. And as I said, in terms of the craving and the anxiety. Thank you. So we think that cannabidiol does show the promise for treatments of craving and anxiety. It's not THC. So as I said, there's a promise, but we have to be very careful. It's about, if something's going to be medicinal, it has to be we have to know the specific strain, or therefore the specific components that are really helping us. For example, in different aspects of pain that we're also studying, we know that we need THC at a certain dose. So for our chronic pain patients, that's a very different cannabinoid strain and very different cannabinoid components that we need. The individual differences we also see. Genetics plays a role. We know that behavioral traits also impact on the psychopathology associated with cannabinoids and their treatment. And it's really important that when we all talk about, the legalization of marijuana, which I think is very important, I was against it to start. Our government, making it very tough for us to even do research, have made me change our minds, because without research, you will not have medicinal and medical marijuana. But we can't be naive. The marijuana in the developing brain, especially marijuana concentrations today on the street, is not the concentrations that were there when we were in school. These guys will tell you I didn't smoke. So they were like, how did you become an addiction researcher when you didn't take these drugs? But the marijuana today that the teens are having is changing the psychiatric pathology that we see. So we can't just be naive about that. So the developing brain is really important. So we have this huge list of, everybody says, oh, it's medicinal and it has this great value. All of these, from writer's cramp, these are the things, it's not meant for you to write all of the symptoms that it's being touted as the miracle drug. And for me, it's not. I think that there are components of the marijuana plant that is absolutely medicinal, but it's not a miracle drug. And with that, thank you.